the conflict in Ukraine is the clearest example of a battle between good and evil that we've had since World War II. It is that black and white. There is a good side and an evil side in this fight. And in some ways, I envy the soldiers who are on the right side of this, because at least there's no moral ambiguity. I certainly don't envy the conditions they have to endure, the losses they have to suffer, the friends they have to mourn. But unlike some of our recent conflicts and even historical conflicts, my dad was a Vietnam vet, there's no moral ambiguity in this one. They are defending good. They are defending their homes. They are defending freedom. They are defending democracy against a brutal, totalitarian dictator. It is that clear.
Hello and welcome. Our guest this week on The Edge is former U.S. naval pilot Ken Harbaugh. And since leaving the armed forces, he's become something of a journalist, producing his own film, and he has content that he puts out on all the usual platforms, including here on YouTube. And I recommend you go check it out. He is also part of the largest, most popular group of content producers in the English-speaking world, the Midas Network. Ken's content focuses on those issues dear to his heart, including here in Ukraine, where he just was part of a large group of influential content creators and figures who came here to take a look, and we were only too happy to help out in some small measure. So now that he has gone back to the States, we had the chance, since he has kind of mulled over what he witnessed, what he saw, what he heard, we talk about all of it. But additionally, in some other topics that Ken finds particularly important, we also do discuss, for example, Veterans Affairs and what America looks like under a second Trump administration. I am sure that you will find something interesting and or informative out of this discussion. And if you do indeed, please click that subscribe button and share far and wide. We'd appreciate it if you do. So, Ken, thank you for taking your time out. It's good to see you again. You left here, what was it, about a week and a half ago, 10 days ago, roughly? Maybe a week? Is that when we last saw one another?
It feels like years, Philip. I went from one war zone to another war zone. I don't know if you follow news in the U.S., but I'd rather be in Ukraine a lot of the time.
Well, yeah, maybe we'll circle back and talk on that a little bit. But yeah, of course, as a Californian, I'm watching, and as an American, I'm watching with great distress. And so, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that. But first and foremost, I mean, you say it feels like years. I mean, have you had a chance to digest? Because you'd been here before.
Sure.
You came in here this time with some really prominent and influential people. Harry Dunn, who was, of course, at the Hill on January 6th, and who's, in my opinion, a national hero.
Can you describe what we're standing in front of and what it's for?
Man, it's 50 cal. Basically, is defending this country against a Russian invasion. I've come to learn that this is for shooting down drones.
You had Denver Riggleman, former congressman from Virginia.
Networks here with Denver Riggleman in a small village on the outskirts of Kherson.
You even had Ken Casey from the Dropkick Murphys.
Ken Casey of the Dropkick Murphys. We just finished delivering this ambulance to our Ukrainian partners, a military unit.
Who I had the pleasure of spending a day with in his studio. Have you had time to digest, and have those guys who came in with you had time to digest, and have you heard back from them?
Sure. I mean, we stay in touch. Look, most of us were friends before this latest convoy, and I should explain that the point of us going to Ukraine is not to be disaster/war tourists, right? I am reporting from Ukraine and went right up to the to the Dnieper in Kherson. We got to the front, and the others are part of a aid convoy that is delivering critical aid and ambulances. Ken Casey, the lead singer of the Dropkick Murphys, was actually the driver of an ambulance that was going to a frontline unit, and very proud to be able to actually do something real and not just spectate. But honestly, observing it up close, firsthand, is also really important, because 4 days later, Ken is doing a major concert on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and he's talking about Ukraine. That matters. Getting Americans over there, I'm told it actually means something to the Ukrainians that we meet. Maybe they're just being polite, but I guarantee you it means something when they come back home and can speak with authority about what is actually happening in Ukraine. Remember, we were there, at least part of our team was there during Operation Spiderweb and for the Russian counterattack. I don't know if it's fair to call it that, because all the Russians did was attack civilian targets, right? And to be able to convey that to an American voting public, an American audience, it still matters.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, but I don't think that there can be any accusation of war tourism, because this is important. Bringing attention to this conflict, keeping this conflict in people's minds is important, and getting an understanding of what's happening here by getting boots on the ground who can then, as you say, go back and relay that to an American audience. But what is the impression that you're hearing from the guys that went with you? And again, this is not your first time here, but what impression did you take away from this trip about the nature of this conflict and the nature of the Ukrainian people?
Well, I keep coming back because of my experience on that first trip. And similarly, everyone I traveled with on this latest trip, especially those who were seeing Ukraine for the first time, called it a life-changing experience. I mean, Ken Casey used those words. He said, this trip has changed my life. And I know what they're talking about is their interactions with the Ukrainian people. I mean, part of it is seeing the destruction that Russia has unleashed, but most of it is just being in the company of a warrior society that has not lost its compassion, its dignity. I mean, it is the picture of what a society should be.
Sense of humor, sense of joie de vivre. I mean, they're still alive despite everything that the Russians throw at them. They're still maintaining their humanity. I think that's one of the things that I get impressed by.
If Ukraine pulls through this, and I think it will, I'm confident it will, but it's on a knife's edge right now, because they're facing off against one of the most powerful militaries in the world with more nukes than anyone else. But if Ukraine gets through this, I would not be at all surprised if in a generational time span, if in 40 or 60 years, Ukraine is the powerhouse of Europe. They have all of the ingredients, and then they have something that most European countries don't have, which is this cohesiveness, this shared sense of national mission. And if we can just help them beat Russia, they will be, I think, a beacon for freedom and progress for centuries to come.
Maybe at this time in crisis in our own nation, maybe we can take some lessons there as well. I want to talk to some specific things that you did during the trip. Maybe not all of them, and if I missed one and you want to highlight it, by all means, bring it up. But one of the most, aside from bringing in all the cars and the ambulance and all the rest of it, you spent time with the guys who every night provide me a shield under which I can sleep. And that is air defense in Kiev, the capital, which is arguably the best air defense in the country for good reason. Tell me a little bit about your experience spending time in the middle of the night with those guys shooting down the ordnance that Russia sends over here to kill us in our beds.
Yeah, well, this is the second time I visited this specific anti-drone gun crew, and I chose to go back to them because of who makes up the team. It is commanded by a volunteer whose call sign is Judge. And the first time I met him, I actually knew, but to get the story on camera, I asked him, "Why is your call sign Judge?" And he said, I happen to be a member of the Ukrainian Supreme Court. And in his spare time, he shoots down drones to defend his city. And on the first day of the war, when the Russian tanks were approaching Kyiv, he and fellow members of the Ukrainian Supreme Court grabbed Kalashnikovs from the local armory, and they ran to the front to defend their country, their city, and their homes. And it just makes you wonder if anyone on the U.S. Supreme Court would grab an AK or an AR and rush to the front if their city and their country was being threatened. I can't see it. But when talking about Ukraine, it paints a picture of the kind of people we are dealing with. Supreme Court justices grabbing automatic weapons to defend their city. And even today, years later, they are spending all of their free time and all of their spare income, right? Because the only thing the Ukrainian military is able to provide them is the weapon and enough ammo to shoot down the drones. Not enough for practice, shooting down, practice targets. It doesn't have the resources to provide them with like the sighting equipment, the laser designators, things like that. They provide all of that themselves. They get a gun and they get enough ammo to shoot their targets, and the rest is on them, and they don't complain. They don't have a complaint in the world. They're honored to be able to defend their city in this way. And they explained to me that, look, Ukrainian military has some great gear. It's all going to the front right now. Like they're not making excuses. They understand that they are stuck with 150 cal and a Maxim machine gun from World War II. And with that, they're able to do their jobs. And it's extraordinary watching them in action.
Well, I'm thankful for them on a daily basis because we rely on them here. You talk about having an old Maxim from World War II or a single 50 cal. I have, you say that the response from Russia has been rather anemic, and it was until a couple of nights ago. We had a really tough night, and we can expect some more. But what we're not seeing is so much the Patriot missile batteries that are supposed to be protecting us here. Did you hear anything from those guys that you spent the nights with, or your other folks you spoke to here who were concerned? And how concerned are you about us not providing Patriots?
I'm deeply concerned, but you got to understand the Ukrainians I'm talking to have to be careful, right? I think in the back of their minds, they know they're not just talking to an ally and a former Navy pilot. They're talking to a journalist. And on one hand, they want to express their frustration that we out of the gate, the U.S. said, we'll be with you as long as it takes. And we provided them with some critical things, right? But now we are not just turning our back, we are stabbing them in the back, but they still need us. So they're walking this fine line between expressing their frustration at the betrayal and knowing that our current president still has really powerful levers that he can either use against Russia or use against Ukraine. Every Ukrainian has to be a diplomat of sorts when talking to me. But reading between the lines, they are deeply frustrated that we are breaking our promise to be with them as long as it takes, to provide them with the Patriots and the other missiles. Not that we don't have them, we're just shifting them to other parts of the world or punishing Ukrainian civilians because our president is having a temper tantrum. They know all this. In fact, the Ukrainians I speak with, to a person, understand what's going on in American politics better than Americans do, because their lives depend on it. And they have insights that I wished most Americans had.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention the fact that there's ink on paper. We signed the Budapest Memorandum.
Yeah.
We made a promise that if they gave up their nukes, we would defend their borders. And so it's not just going back on promises we made during the full-scale invasion. We're actually betraying a document that we are signatories to, and that causes questions in my mind, and I know many Ukrainians, about just how good are the Americans were. And your personal opinion of what the administration is doing with your Ukraine policy. What's your take on it?
I'm appalled. I think it is the most shameful period in American foreign policy, certainly in my lifetime, but probably going all the way back to, well, you have to go back a long ways to find something this disgraceful. And most Americans don't even see it. I mean, there are certain flashpoints like the Oval Office meeting that raise some awareness with Americans of just how badly we are handling this, just how disrespectful and disloyal America is being.
It's going to be a very hard thing to do business like this.
Again,
I tell you.
just say thank you.
I said a lot of times to American people.
Accept that there are disagreements, and let's go litigate those disagreements rather than trying to fight it out in the American media when you're wrong.
I sometimes lose sleep, which is a flip thing to say, I guess, because my friends in Ukraine lose sleep because of drones and glide bombs. But, you know, I lie awake with anger at the country that I served doing what it's doing to Ukraine.
Well, even worse, sometimes we sleep through it because we become so inured to it, and that's not natural. We shouldn't be sleeping through air raid sirens or explosions. That's not a normal human reaction to things. You know, it's funny you mentioned that meeting in the White House, in the Oval, where Trump and Vance are berating Zelensky and saying, you don't have any cards, you don't have any cards.
You got to be more thankful, because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
You already mentioned Operation Spiderweb. The Ukrainians did not tell POTUS. They did not coordinate. What do you think that means?
I think it means a couple of things. I think the most generous interpretation is that they didn't need our help. And, you know, why would they spread the word if they could do this by themselves? OPSEC is a thing in Ukraine. It apparently isn't in the U.S. when you have our Secretary of Defense sharing war plans over Signal. So I think that
and
is
no
probably,
consequences. No consequences.
And no consequences. There will be in 26. I'm convinced of that with the midterm elections. But I think that is probably the majority of the explanation. But I'm sure in the backs of the minds of the Ukrainians is the realization that our DNI is cozy with Vladimir Putin, Tulsi Gabbard, that our White House leaks like a sieve, and that the commander-in-chief has blamed Ukraine for the war, right? Why would they share this kind of intel with an administration that doesn't support them? I think it is a damning indictment of the Trump administration.
Yeah, and it makes me almost embarrassed to interact with Ukrainians on a daily basis with that betrayal. Before I move on to other topics, I just wanted to touch one more thing about Spiderweb, and that is the operation itself. What you think about it? And while you were here, you mentioned something that, of course, now that I went back and looked up your bio again, you used to fly in the Navy you're going to refine this for me, I'm sure, but basically an electronic countermeasure platform, air platform. Is that?
Yeah, there's a photo of it somewhere behind me. I flew EP3s.
There it is.
We can forgive your audience for having no idea what we're talking about. The American military.
I bring it up for a reason. I bring it up. But I bring it up for a reason because, again, I want your reflection on Spiderweb in general and what that means. But also, in particular, one of the things that were hit during Spiderweb is I believe the A-50. Their kind of electronic command and control, logistics, basically an AWAC, an AWACS kind of version. Having flown an ECW platform, how bad do you think that is for the Russians to have lost those AWACS? And again, what do you think about Spiderweb in general?
Well, it is doubly bad for the Russians because their manufacturing economy is dead, right? It's a petro economy at this point, a petro and war economy, and they can't replace those things. So every one of those losses is effectively a permanent hit on the Russian war machine. They probably can't even make spare parts for a lot of these machines at this point. So you take out an A-50, and if you take out enough of them, you have blinded the Russian military when it comes to the air picture along the front. And I think that is going to be absolutely critical going forward. As to my take on Operation Spiderweb, absolutely brilliant. And so beautifully asymmetric. And the fact that it targeted military installations, it took the high road, it took the asymmetric road. It's really hard to wage asymmetric warfare like this and target purely military installations. When you think of the examples of asymmetric warfare that we have faced up against, it is often hitting softer targets, which is morally ambiguous, right? It's hitting shopping centers and things like that. The Ukrainians went after pure military strategic targets. They did it asymmetrically with a few $1 million worth of drones and destroyed, I think estimates range in the $7 billion range of Russian equipment. But the cost is way beyond that because some of this kit is irreplaceable. And you saw the rage of Putin in the days following. I was actually in Kherson with a kamikaze drone crew the night afterwards, and it was nonstop. Just the amount of shaheds coming overhead, and the following night as well, we were in Odessa when Odessa had the biggest barrage since the beginning of the war. I mean, Putin unleashed hell across Ukraine as retaliation for Operation Spiderweb, and he targeted neighborhoods and schools and hospitals. I mean, the very fact that in Ukraine it's dangerous to live next to a hospital should tell you something about Russia's way of war.
Ain't that the truth? And they'll just chuck munitions just willy nilly. I mean, these shahed drones, they're basically just remote controlled planes that you just kind of throw at something. So yeah, they don't have any deference towards military or civilian. In fact, they prefer civilian because it terrorizes the population. You say you were down in Kherson. We have repeatedly on this channel covered the human safari that originated there, where they actually hunt human beings knowing that they're civilians. They must know they're civilians because there's an operator on the other end of the signal there. So they know they're hitting, ambulance drivers, or they're hitting, old ladies or people sitting at bus stops or what have you. So I want to commend you, Ken, and the team that you went down there with, because I won't name any names because I don't want to get any of my former colleagues in trouble. But I mean, I know journalistic organizations that are sent here to Ukraine and are specifically told, do not leave the capital. It's too dangerous.
They're in full
expensive.
battle rattle. They're in helmet and vest on top of the Intercontinental.
That's right. They're standing on the balcony of the Intercontinental in battle rattle. And it's not safe here in Kiev, but comparatively, it's nothing compared to what's happening out east. So tell me, since you mentioned Kherson in particular, let's start with Kherson. What was your impression of Kherson?
Well, it's my third time to Kherson, and this is the farthest I went. I mean, we crossed one of the tributaries, so we're right up next to the river. And for those who don't know, that is the zero line, right? If you're looking at the river, that means the Russians can see you. You are quite possibly in their crosshairs. People get sniped from the other side of the Dnieper. And again, it was the time I spent with the Ukrainians that left the lasting impression. Getting bombed doesn't rattle me in the same way that having a conversation with someone who's like opening up about what the war has done to them rattles me. That's what That's always what sticks with me, right? It was a rough night. We were supposed to be at the front for a couple of hours. We got stuck there for 20 hours because of the Russian counterattack, and I lost count after the 8th FPV drone hit in our, not directly on our position, or I wouldn't be talking to you, but trying to probe to find where we were. And it was just nonstop, like all night, boom, boom, boom. The Russian drones are coming in. And the guys just kept their cool the whole time. But a couple of them, I have to be careful with how much I share. There are people serving at the front who have family members in occupied territories a few thousand meters away. And I cannot imagine the mental toll that takes on a Ukrainian soldier, knowing or wondering what is happening to his family members in the Russian occupied territories. And I'm glad that I was able to hear that story, because it gives me ammo, if you will, to answer those who say we should just give the Russians what they've got, right? That will just solve it. I think Americans need to understand what that means for those living in the Russian controlled territories. It means torture, the destruction of churches, the suppression of faith. It means, I mean, it's worse than living behind the Iron Curtain. It would be as if you were living behind the Iron Curtain during World War II, right? It is a war zone of almost unimaginable oppression, and it's Ukrainian territory. I mean, the best analogy I could give is if someone raided your home and camped out in your living room, and the police said, the best way to solve this is just to let them have your living room and let bygones be bygones. That is why Ukraine is unwilling to accept this. It's their territory, and Ukrainians are living there still, and they need to get it back.
You're right. And, look, having been down in Kherson, and I'm sure having spoken to Ukrainians while you were here, you must have heard some stories of what it's actually like to be occupied by the Russians, and what the Russians do in the occupied territories, forcing people to take, Russian passports and give up their Ukrainian passports. Of course, stop speaking the Ukrainian language, stop, observing Ukrainian traditions, or, as you mentioned, religion. I mean, it's you're either Russian Orthodox or nothing. And there's a lot of people out east who have a variety of different religions. We hear stories of like pregnant mothers giving birth, and if they don't have a Russian passport, the child is taken from them because, of course, the child is now Russian. It's a good point to bring up, that when we flippantly say, just finish the war, please God, we're terrified of this war, that what they're asking Ukrainians to do is condemn their fellow family members or compatriots to live under that kind of oppression. So it's well worth mentioning, and a message we need to get out more and more. But aside from Kherson, you also went to Odessa, and Odessa is one of my favorite places on earth. It is incredibly strategically important. There's been a lot of talk recently, not least of which by President Zelensky himself, saying that the Ukrainians believe that the Russians will not engage in any kind of good faith discussion about peace because they think that they can get to Odessa. Maybe not this year, but maybe next, is I think what Zelensky's deputy chief said at one point. Tell me about your impressions of Odessa, first and foremost.
Well,
just
my
the
impressions
place itself
this
and
time,
the people.
My impressions this time were rather different, because we arrived at 2 a.m. just as the salvos of shaheds were landing. I very rarely get nighttime footage of drone attacks because I'm usually either asleep or taking cover. But I was out, and just the footage of these things flying overhead. Some of the best footage I got. I probably shouldn't be proud of that, but to think that Ukrainians are living with this on a regular basis, it's just it's astonishing. That was my first impression of Odessa on this trip, was the number of drones that were flying in. My lasting impression, again, is of the Ukrainian people, because at first light, we got up. Obviously, the all clear was sounded, and we set out to find the people who had been impacted. And very close to our hotel, there's a neighborhood that a shahed hit. It's Ken Harbaugh with the Midas Touch and Valor Media Networks here in a suburban neighborhood in Odessa, Ukraine. Nothing of military significance anywhere around here. The people were already beginning the cleanup. All the windows were blown out. There were the cars in the yard in the middle of this neighborhood were still smoking, right? There was a crater with parts of a shahed in it. The authorities hadn't gotten there yet. That's not true. I'm sure the medical authorities had gotten there because there was a severely burned man who was taken care of. But they hadn't recovered the pieces of the shahed or anything. We were the first to see that, and they were picking stuff up. They were tidying up. They were beginning to board up their windows. They were moving on, and it is always tough talking to someone in the aftermath of something like that, because they're vulnerable, they're raw, they're emotional. But it's also important, if it's done respectfully, to get them in that moment to convey the horror to an American audience. And I was just struck by how resilient the people I talked to were. And even in that moment, how proud they were of their military for having targeted military assets inside Russia. And this was the price that the civilians had to pay for that military success.
Well, and Odessites are, famous. You go to pretty much every city in Ukraine, but some more than others, and Odessites are fiercely proud of their city. They are, and they're so angry at the Russians currently. I'll tell you a quick story. The first time I went to Odessa after the full-scale invasion had begun, and I've been going to Odessa for 20 years, but the first time I went there since the full-scale invasion, I noticed that all the road signs had been covered over with black plastic baggies. And I went into a restaurant and I had lunch, and I was speaking to my waitress, and I said, the Russians can just tear that. That's not a really good, why don't you knock down the signs or something? Because the Russians can just tear off that plastic baggie and, they're good to go. And I'll never forget it as long as I live. The waitress leaned over and in an almost conspiratorial voice said, "Yes, but then they have to get out of their armored vehicles. and that's when we can kill them." And I just went, oh, I pity any Russian that steps foot in this city. As a military man, I want to ask you an important question about Odessa, because I've been preoccupied with the show. I've been kind of stuck here in Kiev. Without obviously betraying any OPSEC or anything like that, which I know you wouldn't do, but again, Zelensky has said openly that the Russians intend to take Odessa. Having been down there, seeing the defenses, getting a gauge of the resilience of the people of Odessa, what is your assessment of what it would cost Russia to try and take that city?
They can't. Unless they use tactical nukes, they're not taking Odessa. It has become a fortress. Furthermore, the Russians don't have a Black Sea fleet anymore, right? What are they going to take it with? Unless they blackmail Ukraine into giving it up with nukes, which hopefully we still have enough integrity as a country, the U.S., to not let them do that. There's no tactical way to take Odessa, especially without a fleet. And the Ukrainians have done a masterful job of taking on the second biggest navy in the world and sinking it.
Yeah, without a Navy. Yeah, and I don't know, as feckless as the West has been, is the West really going to let Russia take control of one of the world's greatest ports and the most important departure point for a lot of the world's food supply? Is the West really going to just passively sit there and let them cut Ukraine off from the sea and all the grain and stuff? So
Yeah.
I'm with you there. I don't think they can take it, and I also think that there would be a reaction from the West if they did try to take Odessa. I've always said that their strategic goals are to change the government in Kiev and to take back control of Odessa, because while Odessa is Ukrainian, Sevastopol and the home port of the Black Sea Fleet will never be safe. And we see that now. So I'm glad to hear that you're of the same mind and the same assessment that Odessa is perhaps a bigger pill for them to swallow than they can possibly do. I want to talk about. I got a couple of more questions here for you. But I do want to talk about one other aspect that you do, and you've got your film there, Against All Enemies, and you've done a lot of things for veteran affairs. And if I can just transition briefly away from Ukraine, we'll step back before we finish. But another quick story: when I was embedded as a CBS reporter and producer in Iraq, I remember going to. We were leaving. I think we were flying out of Kirkuk or something. And I'm sure you sat in a whole bunch of these places where there's a big screen TV and a lot of guys lying around waiting for their flight to come in so they can go wherever they're going. There's coffee and maybe some, pastries or some cookies or something. And they're all sitting around watching a movie. And I remember seeing there's this god-awful John Cusack movie called Identity. And in it, no, I'm not going to, no spoilers, but there's a scene where somebody gets run over, and it's meant to be very disturbing and alerting. And I found myself sitting in a room with a bunch of U.S. service members who broke out into laughter. It wasn't shocking to them. It wasn't distressing. It was like, hey, that happened last week on patrol when you ran over that guy. Remember that? And I remember turning to my cameraman and saying, we might have a problem here afterwards. I know that you are engaged in veteran affairs, but we are now seeing a lot of guys being deployed, and this will come out after Trump's parade, and I'm sure there's more to roll out before now and when I publish this conversation, where we're going to see disruption on the streets of America. Many of these guys are veterans. How concerned are you that there was trauma from those wars that now folks have rotated home and are kind of putting that out on the streets of America?
Well, I'm concerned. You mentioned Against All Enemies. I mean, I had a team for that film embedded with the Proud Boys for a long time, investigating just this phenomenon. But to your observation about gallows humor in wartime, I do think there is a reason for it, and I certainly wouldn't criticize the guys in the trenches who are trying to find some.
No, don't misunderstand me. I spent a lot of time embedded with U.S. forces, and I have nothing but the deepest respect for them. But I also know that those wars were tough. Yeah. And they were tough to go through. And I think a lot of guys came home with a lot of baggage.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And so I'm wondering, as we see the Trump administration put, armed troops and guys that are veterans on the streets against their fellow Americans, I know it's distressing for me. I have nothing but respect. I spent so much time. Yeah. I've been under fire with U.S. forces. I've bivouacked in the middle of a shamal in Iraq with an entire brigade and got to know them pretty friendly. But again, it's disturbing to me, and I'm wondering within the veterans community, because I know there are veterans who are against this.
Yeah.
How concerned you all are about that.
I'm worried about it too. I tell you what worries me possibly more is the potential for deputizing some of the more extremist veteran-led organizations. I still hold out hope. I spoke with General McChrystal yesterday. That episode is going up tonight. And the bar for the military to actually engage with American civilians is going to be really, really high. And God forbid it ever comes to that. I think the greater risk in this moment is groups like the Proud Boys or the Three Percenters, who I think are going to be engaged by this administration to knock heads. They certainly have been given tacit permission already because their leaders have not just been pardoned, but celebrated for what they did on January 6th. You know, we're talking about, in a lot of cases, veterans who came back with an axe to grind. Stuart Rhodes, leader of the Oath Keepers, for example. And they're the real shock troops for the Trump administration. When you think about the historical analogs, you think about Mussolini's black shirts and Hitler's brown shirts. Those were irregular forces, right? They started with those. Hitler started with the brown shirts as his private militia until he had time to consolidate power within the regular military. The regular military was very resistant for a long time to the appeals of Nazism. But it was the brown shirts that took to the streets and enforced order and terror, frankly, on the opponents of the regime. And I think we're going to see some of that very, very soon. I am totally opposed to the deployment of National Guard troops and especially active duty Marines to LA. I think we need to pay very close attention to the EOs and other orders coming out of the White House. In this case, it doesn't limit the permission to LA. It says the National Guard can be federalized and deployed anywhere, and not enough people are talking about that. I mean, we're on a knife's edge right now, and everyone I've talked to who studies authoritarianism says we are checking every box on the way to an authoritarian government.
Well, you know, to bring it back to Ukraine, I think a lot of guys that I speak to here who are in the Legion or who've come over in one way, shape, or form, who were veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, Brits and Americans alike, who say that one of the things that was so disturbing about their service and the conflicts that they were directly involved with prior to this is that there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of gray, a lot of why are we here? What are we doing? What's our purpose? What's our mission goal? Here in Ukraine, things are a lot clearer. Yeah. There's black and white. There is a good guy and a bad guy. And they find a lot of solace in that. And I know you spoke to some guys who were veterans of other wars. What's your impression of their involvement and that kind of that draw to be, you know, fighting something as blatantly aggressive as Moscow?
The conflict in Ukraine is the clearest example of a battle between good and evil that we've had since World War II. It is that black and white. There is a good side and an evil side in this fight. And in some ways, I envy the soldiers who are on the right side of this, because at least there's no moral ambiguity. I certainly don't envy the conditions they have to endure, the losses they have to suffer, the friends they have to mourn. But unlike some of our recent conflicts and even historical conflicts, my dad was a Vietnam vet, there's no moral ambiguity in this one. They are defending good. They are defending their homes. They are defending freedom. They are defending democracy against a brutal, totalitarian dictator. It is that clear.
And bringing it back to combining our two discussions about what's happening domestically, and I'm watching it from afar, you're back in the States, is that I see some similarities as well between what happened on Maidan in 2014 and the uprising against Yanukovych and what I'm seeing by citizens going out onto the streets today in protest against what the Trump administration is doing with ICE and other matters. And I see some parallels there. But unfortunately, Maidan was bloody. I mean, it took the Heavenly 100, the ones who were shot dead, protesting, not 500 meters, not far from where I'm sitting right now. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen in the United States. But it was citizen power, despite all the conspiracy theorists who love to say that it was the CIA and everything was orchestrated by Victoria Nuland, and that Maidan wasn't a real uprising. But I see a similar spirit in citizen power between Maidan, because I was on Maidan, and I see some similarities there. Are you? I know you probably were not here on Maidan in 2014, but you must speak to people who are. Do you? Again, we're coming back to this common cause of like Ukrainians are fighting for democracy. Maybe we should take a page from their book and stand up to a guy who is clearly aiming to be a tyrant and abuses power. Are you hopeful that maybe there can be more similarities and commonality and common cause between Ukrainians fighting for freedom and Americans trying to hold on to their freedoms?
I certainly take inspiration from it. I doubt whether most Americans really understand what Ukraine has been through to secure its freedom. And most Americans, I think, still don't perceive the gravity of the threat to our democracy. That is changing, though. That is changing as the ICE raids, for example, become impossible to ignore when you see armed agents invading otherwise peaceful communities and ripping families apart. I know 77 million Americans voted for Trump, but I have to believe the vast majority of them did not vote for that. Some did, let's be clear, but most of them did not vote for that. And I think as this chaos spreads to other American communities, Americans are going to realize that it was peaceful before this, before these policies were implemented. It's not as if the Trump administration and ICE are reacting to chaos. They are fomenting it. They are instigating it. And I don't think that is going to be lost on Americans come 2026 and the midterm elections and the opportunity to weigh in with their votes on what is happening. Now, it begs the question, why, knowing all this, is the Trump administration still behaving the way it is? And this gets into really dark territory. It suggests that, they know that what they're doing is unpopular. They know that it is alienating voters that they need to win. Maybe they're not as concerned about the election in 2026 as people who believe in democracy would be.
We know the Russians have been interfering with our elections at least since 2016, and the people of this country and the former Soviet Union in general and other areas within Europe are very familiar with Russia's campaigns to undermine democracy. So I find common cause between what the Ukrainians are doing here, what they did on Maidan, and what those who are, standing up against Trump are doing in the United States. I don't know if you'd like to touch further on that, whether you see the same thing. I mean, we can take lessons from the Ukrainians is what I'm trying to get at here, I suppose.
Yeah, I wish we would. I certainly do. There is a lot to learn. It's, I guess, incumbent upon us in the media to convey those lessons in a way that more Americans can learn them. I fear that most Americans don't really appreciate how manipulative foreign powers have been, especially Russia, in terms of our information ecosystem. I mean, when you look at how sophisticated some of these information ops are by Russia, they will actually provoke both sides of an argument and fuel stories on either side just to get Americans to fight each other.
Divide and conquer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think still too many Americans fall for that.
Yeah, well, they certainly know about it here as well, and they're pushing back on it. And just as we kind of start to wrap things up here, why is it guys like you have to come over here? I have to come here and set up this studio. Our mass media is doing, and I can say this as a former part of the industry, is dropping the ball sorely. We are not communicating to our population why Ukraine is so important and why keeping a sovereign Ukraine is important, not only for itself and out of principle and obligations that we made, as we mentioned the Budapest Memorandum, but because a reinvigorated Russia that looms over Europe, they don't have to roll tanks on the Champs-Élysées. They can just sit and, if they win in Ukraine, they get a breather, they rebuild, and then they can just say to the markets in London or Paris, do as we instruct you to do, or the looming threat of a military backed by nuclear weapons is going to be there. That changes the world. Why can't we get that message out, do you think, to the American audience?
Well, I have lost most of my faith in the mass media or the legacy media to cover this kind of thing. I don't think we should hold our breath. And the media landscape is changing in fundamental ways anyway, in a lot of ways that hurt the cause, but in some ways that we can take advantage of. I mean, some of the other people we were bringing along on the convoy are social media influencers. They don't have the same platform as an MSNBC anchor might, but they've got a couple 100,000 followers on TikTok or something like that. In aggregate, if you can get enough people like that saying, "Hey, I learned something," and get their followers to begin talking about it, that's how you shift perceptions in America today. It's not with an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post. It's not with an appearance on MSNBC. It's getting a bunch of these influencers to start talking about it. I don't have the stats in front of me. I'm going to make them up, but I'm not going to be that far off. The overwhelming majority of young people today get their news over social media, right? Over TikTok, and it's upwards of like 80%. It's not on cable news. It's certainly not on the nightly news. They're getting it over social media. I think that's where we need to focus our attention, and we're trying to do that. That's who we are sharing these stories with. That's who we're bringing to Ukraine to help get the word out.
Well, I'm really appreciative of it, and as I say, I mean, there's a couple of other points I'd like to discuss with you, but one of the other things that the message doesn't seem to be getting through is, and this is in the aftermath, in particular of Operation Spiderweb, we have victory after victory after victory for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians take back every major city, Kherson, Kharkiv, except for Mariupol. They've taken back that territory. Now they're getting attrited on the front lines, but then behind the lines they keep hitting things. They've sunk, as we've mentioned, the Black Sea Fleet without a navy. It's just this continuous resilience of the Ukrainian people, the ingenuity, the willingness, and the aggressiveness. Why do we have to keep convincing Westerners and Americans in particular? No, Russia is not an inevitability. It is not some force of nature that cannot be stopped. Despite our own eyes and the victory after victory and the success after success of the Ukrainians that I'm sure you saw yourself while you were here, why is the narrative still that Moscow is unstoppable, do you think? And what can we do to counter it?
Honestly, I think some of this is disinfo ops by the Kremlin. When you look at how they have penetrated the conversation, how they've actually gotten senior American officials, including J.D. Vance, right, to parrot Russian talking points. This is information ops 101. And the Ukrainians need to get better at it, but we need to help them out as well. I do believe, though, that given the realities on the battlefield and behind the lines in Russia, that the dissolution of Russia is going to happen and it's going to surprise a lot of people. I don't know when it's going to happen, but no government can endure very long what Putin's government is having to endure. You know, high double-digit inflation, complete decimation of its military and industrial base, punishing sanctions. There's that phrase, all dictatorships look good until the last 5 minutes. I think when Putin's last 5 minutes come, it is going to be a shock to a lot of people who aren't paying attention.
I think you're right. I think one of the first leaders of the Chechen rebellion in the 90s, Chokar Dudayev, said Ukraine will be the place where Moscow's future is decided.
Wow.
And either one or the other one, and that was back in the 90s. So this is unlike what President Trump likes to say. In some ways, in many ways, I feel, unfortunately, this war was almost inevitable. You talk about messaging. I appreciate what you do. I appreciate the trips that you come over here and the focus and the attention that you keep bringing here, and especially with the audience that you have, Ken. And I appreciate you coming and speaking to me here now, currently, while you kind of digested your trip, and we could talk about it in reflection. I know you're going to keep supporting Ukraine. We have every intention here. Those of us working, you got to meet some of my team, and we're not going anywhere. We're gonna keep doing it. Is there anything else you'd like to say to my audience before we wrap this up about your experience in Ukraine and thoughts about this conflict and why it matters to them, and most importantly, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, look, if I haven't made it clear yet, I think that Ukraine's fight for democracy is the world's fight for democracy. It's just the front line. And if we don't win in Ukraine, it's going to spill over to the Baltics. It's going to spill over to Poland. It's going to hit NATO allies. And there will be American boots on the ground if we don't give the Ukrainians the tools they need to fight in Ukraine. They're not asking for American blood. They're just asking for a little help. The other thing I would offer to the Ukrainians watching is that I know how big of a disappointment America must be right now, but there's this Churchillian observation that I keep going back to from World War II when he said, America always does the right thing after exhausting every other possibility. We are in the phase of exhausting every other possibility right now. I do believe we will come around. If there's one lasting political development from our betrayal of Ukraine, it's that you are seeing the most hawkish Democratic Party in generations. You're seeing a Democratic Party. This is the party of doves, right? Mm-hmm. You're seeing a Democratic Party that when it regains power will have Ukraine's back. And I think there will be a correction in American politics starting in 2026. You're starting to see it already on the streets of American cities. And I am confident that Ukraine can hold out. I wish you didn't have to hold out without American support, but eventually America will do the right thing. I feel it in my bones.
Yeah, it's just the sad fact of it is how many Ukrainians have to die before or suffer before America comes around to that realization. Ken Harbaugh, it's always good touching base with you. If there is ever anything that you need from over here on your next trip, if you call me up, I'm happy to facilitate anything at all. I appreciate, again, what you've been doing. We'll put links to all of your stuff that you put out on your YouTube channel. Obviously, you've got your Patreon, which has some great stuff there, and your film Against All Enemies. I appreciate the content that you put out. I appreciate the efforts that you do to keep eyes on Ukraine, and we're watching over here what's happening back there. And again, I think we stand on common ground, and I just wish it wouldn't the cost wouldn't be so high. So thanks for coming over, Ken. It's really been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you, and it's much appreciated.
Thanks, Phil. Really appreciate you having me.
All right. Thank you.